Hello everyone, welcome to Lex Talk, World Talk Show presented by ClickAway Creators. Today we have Dr. Gyahan Gunatilak with us. Gyahan is a founding partner at Lex AG, a law firm based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Prior to co-founding Lex AG, Gyahan was a research director at the Colombo-based think tank Verity Research. From 2015 to 2018, he served as an advisor to the Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry, where he specialized in international human rights treaty compliance. Gyan was also a member of negotiation team that secured Sri Lanka's readmission to the European Union's Generalized Scheme of Preferences, that is GSP Plus, trade concession facility in 2016. Gyahan's doctoral thesis in the law at the University of Oxford focused on state authority to limit individual freedom under international law. He specializes in constitutional law and public law. I have a lot to talk about Gihan. I can just go on and on. But without any further ado, let me introduce you to the man himself. Hello, Gihan. How are you?
Hello, nice to meet you. Yep.
Likewise, Gihan. Before we talk about your specialization and about the most memorable transactions and cases, please brief us about your journey as a legal professional.
All right. I think I'll start with how my interest in law began. And I think it began with my interest in debating at the school level. So Sri Lanka actually has a public school system with a fairly well-developed debating program. And I was fortunate enough to join the debating team of my secondary school. It was a Colombo-based school called St. Joseph's College. And it was in this context that I began to enjoy the value of the art of argumentation. And I began to understand it as a skill, also as a culture where one can appreciate and respect the merits of an opponent's argument without necessarily agreeing with it. And I think that culture is quite crucial for the legal profession to thrive. So many of my peers in debating actually went on to become lawyers, some really brilliant lawyers. And interestingly, it was in this context of debating that I first met my firm's other founding partner, Ranil Angunawala. He was the captain of my debating team. And as 15-year-olds, we decided that we would one day launch a law firm. And 23 years later, we did precisely that. But I think my journey towards setting up this firm with Ranil was a legal circuitous. I completed my law degree in Colombo University back in 2006. And then I went on to sit for the bar exam and joined the bar the next year. And I was completely privileged at that stage to join the chamber of one of the most accomplished civil and constitutional lawyers in the country, President's Counsel M.A. Sumandaran, who is now incidentally a member of parliament. But as a junior counsel, if I recall, I was given incredible opportunities to argue cases at all levels, from domestic violence cases in the magistrates court, to trials in the district court, to bill determinations before the Supreme Court. I say I was privileged because actually my senior was not afraid to throw us juniors in the deep end. He actually gave us so many opportunities to directly appear for clients, and we really got an unusual amount of litigation experience as a result. However much you study the law, my view is that it's the practical exposure that really enables learning. Well, then during this time, I actually went and spent a year overseas to complete a master's in law at Harvard. I actually applied to Harvard soon after graduating, but my first attempt was unsuccessful. I got a nice rejection. But I tried again the next year, and with a little bit more experience under my belt, and I had a scholarship from the Fulbright program the next year, and I was offered a place. And I think that experience was completely transformative. I think it was in the US that I really learned what it was to work really hard. And I think any kind of work ethic I eventually acquired was really due to the experience at Harvard. I also got to work with an incredible team, particularly at their legal clinic, where students, I think, were given these incredible opportunities to work on some of the most groundbreaking cases. And that practical exposure was really inspiring. about 6 years ago, you mentioned this in the introduction. About 6 years ago, uh, well, actually, no, about 6 years into my practice, I decided to enter the domain of legal research, which was a bit of a new area for me. And I joined this research firm in Colombo called Verite Research. I spent nearly a decade there. That's why I made the mistake of the timelines initially. I actually headed the legal team there. And I think this experience was also really valuable for me, both in terms of my ability to understand the limits of the law, and also I understood that my ability to manage large legal teams and aspects of an organization can be enhanced by really throwing myself into an organizational framework. Its founder, Nishan Dimel, is one of Sri Lanka's finest economists. And he had this incredible knack of hiring really smart young analysts. So I got the opportunity to work with really great young people from other disciplines and gain a sort of deeper appreciation for interdisciplinary approaches to the law. And I think I owe a lot of my managerial growth also to Verite. While at Verite, I also began advising the foreign ministry, and it was particularly on their international treaty compliance. I spent about 3 years doing that as a consultant, and I was part of this team that negotiated Sri Lanka's application for the European Union's GSP Plus scheme, and this was a trade scheme which granted preferential treatment to Sri Lanka's exports based on Sri Lanka's compliance with certain human rights treaties. So it's a bit of a strange combination of economics and human rights. And I was very fortunate to be part of that wonderful team that negotiated with the EU in Brussels. But I guess the most recent phase of my journey involved my decision a little late in life, if I might add, to commence a doctorate in law at Oxford. And I had a fantastic professor, Nazila Ghanea, who was one of the most generous academics you can ever find. And she really struck this amazing balance in terms of guiding me on the one hand and also giving me the space to develop my thesis on my own terms. I also had the fortune of having my partner, Shamara, who was with me in Oxford, who empathized a lot with me because she was also a doctoral student, and her encouragement and empathy was absolutely essential to getting through that experience. But I managed to finish the doctorate last year, and I'm now in the process of exploring opportunities to try and get this thesis published. So I think the vision for the law firm with Ranil really relies heavily on our very diverse experiences. His in multiple leading law firms in Sri Lanka and a lot of regulatory bodies, and mine in litigation, research, and a little bit of diplomacy. So we hope to really build on these experiences to provide our clients with viable solutions.
Thank you very much, Gihan, for throwing light on your journey. At the same time, your education has taken you to places. You have studied, and at the same time, you've been a globetrotter as well. So, uh, after knowing about your journey as a legal professional, I'm sure you must have dealt with a lot of memorable cases and transactions. So, let's talk about them. If you have any memorable case or transaction.
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer. I'll tell you what one experience that pops into mind. It perhaps speaks to the importance of having a multidisciplinary approach to legal problems, something that I really learned in my experience in the research space. So while I was at Verite, one of the very bright young researchers began researching on an environmental problem caused by a fishing practice called mechanized bottom trawling, right? And I recall the Verite team engaged one of the best fisheries experts in the country who gave us a lot of data on the damage done to the ocean floor and to marine life through this practice. And then the legal team then discovered that the practice was technically permitted under Sri Lanka's law. So it wasn't actually prohibited despite how serious the environmental degradation was. There was also a diplomatic angle to the problem. So most of the vessels engaging in the practice at the time were actually Indian vessels, and Indian vessels did have traditional fishing rights in Sri Lankan territorial waters. So there was a whole international law angle to this as well. So there was a potential diplomatic crisis brewing, and the Sri Lankan Navy was taking a bit of a heavy-handed approach to this by periodically arresting Indian fishermen for trespass. So when the team looked at this issue, we decided to take an environmental as opposed to a border control approach to the problem. And we began writing legal articles and publishing it in the newspapers. I even managed to get a newspaper article published in the Indian newspapers, trying to appeal to the Indian audience as well. And eventually we managed to generate a fairly powerful public conversation on the harmful nature of the practice. And I then recall one night sitting down with another lawyer, Vidya Nathaniel, and drafting an amendment to the current law to actually prohibit the practice of mechanized bottom trawling. And here's where networks matter. We then worked with my senior lawyer, Mr. Sumandiran, who was a member of parliament at the time. And he had taken a real serious interest in the issue, and he converted the draft to a private member's bill and then submitted it to parliament. And before we know it, we had an actual bill before parliament to prohibit the practice. And eventually, the mounting public pressure really caused the government's own Ministry of Fisheries to decide to sponsor Mr. Sumandiran's bill and table it as a government bill. So it eventually got enacted in parliament, and we managed to secure complete prohibition on the practice for all vessels, not just Indian vessels, but also Sri Lankan vessels. And the number of Indian trawlers engaging the practice soon reduced. So although there's no fairy tale here, there are still major gaps in the enforcement of the new law, it kind of stands out for me as one of my most memorable legal experiences, because it demonstrates that if you combine expertise in multiple fields, work towards generating a public conversation, and then work with the right actors placed in really key positions, and also if you're willing to do the technical work, you can actually bring about tangible change.
Well, thank you again, Gehan, for talking about, for giving us an insight about your most memorable case. And it was really an amazing one. I mean, I don't think that happens with people more often. Now, talking about your specialization, how do you look at constitutional law in 2021, and how do you think it's going to change in maybe 5 years down the line?
Yeah, you're asking some tough questions. So right, Sri Lanka, I think, is at a very important, critical juncture in its sort of constitutional reform journey, if I could call it that. So over the last few decades, there have been numerous efforts to reform the constitution. And I think there are three sort of constitutional priorities that have emerged. One is to reduce the powers of the executive president. That was really an institution that was brought in through the 1978 constitution, the current constitution. The second has been to reform Sri Lanka's electoral system, which has some serious weaknesses. And the third is to ensure meaningful devolution of power to the regions, particularly as a form of reconciliation with the Tamil-speaking communities in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, despite the lapse of many, many years, we have had very little progress on all three of these fronts. In 2015, the 90th Amendment to the Constitution actually did introduce some reforms to limit the powers of the executive president, but that was also reversed last year by the present government. So we are now in the midst of a new constitutional reform initiative, where once again, we are attempting to draft a new constitution. But unfortunately, just judging from the rhetoric around the process, it seems to be much more poised to further entrench executive power and further concentrate power in the central government as opposed to devolve power. So there's a likelihood that we are going in the wrong direction, if I could say that, as far as constitutional reform is concerned. And I think there are very eminent legal personalities currently serving on the committee tasked to draft a new constitution. And I can only hope that they draft something that will really take cognizance of the main priorities that have defined constitutional reform in Sri Lanka over the past few decades. Um, I think to answer your question, there's a lot of constitutional uncertainty in Sri Lanka over the next 5 years.
Right. When we are on constitutional law, how do you think? I mean, is there something that you would like to, pass on to the budding legal practitioners down there when it comes to your opinions about the constitutional law?
Well, I think there are two major priorities that not just legal reformers, but any young lawyer needs to focus on. Um, the first is a big priority, and I accept the limits of the law when it comes to this priority. That is really that to ensure that the idea of equal citizenship, that is the framework where citizens are treated as equal stakeholders under the law, and there are no hierarchies among citizens in terms of their ethnic or religious or gender or sexual identities. This idea, I think, needs to be more deeply embedded into our constitutional framework. And I think constitutional privilege is something that our current constitutional framework really embraces, and that really undermines equal citizenship. So a major priority for reformers and even the young lawyers within the profession is to really devise a constitutional scheme and also a constitutional practice that safeguards and promotes equal citizenship. I think that would be truly transformative in a place like Sri Lanka. But I don't mean to say that legal reform alone can deliver on equal citizenship. I think a parallel cultural transformative project is really needed. So we as lawyers have to know our limits, and we have to work closely with political and social activists, economists, religious leaders to actually move beyond just the letter of the law and ensure cultural transformation. And that's hard to do, and I have to accept that. But the second priority for me is institutional. And I think we have to exert a lot of energies into ensuring that institutions deliver on their mandates efficiently. And I think lawyers also play a role in making or breaking a system. So a lot of good lawyers in Sri Lanka have contributed towards improving institutions. And I mean working towards ensuring that institutions deliver justice in a timely, cost-effective, and sort of sincere manner in good faith. That struggle will continue, and I strongly believe that the next generation of lawyers have a huge responsibility on their shoulders. So their task is not going to be particularly easy.
Thank you very much, Gihan. Now, I mean, right now you're practicing in Sri Lanka, and but you have also been to different places. Uh, Now you must be having a better understanding how the legal system, actually works in Sri Lanka, right? So, according to you, what are some of the challenges encountered when it comes to the legal system in Sri Lanka? And also, you have come up with your own, law firm. And how is your firm setting out to meet those challenges which are out there?
Sure, sure. So I think the most significant challenge encountered by the legal system at the moment is probably the enormous delays encountered by litigants when seeking justice. This problem has very serious implications for Sri Lanka's marketability as an investment and trade destination. The time frame for enforcing contracts compared to, say, a Singapore is very unattractive for potential investors and trading partners. So I think I understand this problem is widely acknowledged, and I have had the privilege to actually work with agencies like UNDP and the past ministries of justice in attempting to design solutions to this problem. The current Minister of Justice, I know, is trying very hard to launch a reform program to make the justice sector more efficient. And I really hope he succeeds because this reform is really quite important. But while institutional reform is being pursued, we as lawyers also have to think about our clients, right? And we have to do what we can do to improve their experiences and deliver for them the most feasible solutions within an imperfect, costly, and time-consuming system. So we have to ask those tough questions. So my partner and I at LexAG, we try to help our clients navigate that system by working with a team that constantly tries to minimize the client's exposure to litigation. This is not always easy, but I think there are now a few like-minded legal professionals who are thinking similarly. So we focus a lot on negotiations and make sure that we work with the best trial lawyers who can really leverage trials to arrive at settlements rather than compel the client to endure sort of long years in litigation. And I think, of course, this is work in progress. So I think there's a long road ahead of us. But hopefully with a combination of reforms initiated by the current minister and a critical mass of lawyers helping their clients to avoid costly and time-consuming litigation, the strain on the legal system will eventually reduce, and we could hopefully improve the efficacy of the system and be competitive in the region.
Well, thank you so much, Gihan, for sharing your experience, your knowledge, and your contributions in the legal space with us. It was a great insight. We really look forward to having a chat with you again in the future on some other trending topics in the international legal industry. And for our viewers, if you like this chat with Gihan, please like and share this video and also subscribe to ClickAway Creators YouTube channel to appreciate what we do, and you have more coming from industry legal leaders. This is Bharti for Lex Talk signing off.